Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the damp, fishy chaos of a Viking dockyard at dawn. The sky still clings to deep streaks of violet and charcoal, the sun not quite sure it wants to show up yet, while gulls wheel overhead, screeching out opinions no one asked for. Under your boots, wooden planks creak and flex with every new burden heaved aboard. Barrels of smoked fish, squealing piglets in rough cages, and stacks of shield boards painted in faded coils of red and yellow. A bearded man elbows past you, carrying a coil of rope that smells alarmingly like last month's seaweed. "Out of the way, soft hands," he grumbles, though with a grin that suggests he'd happily share a horn of ale with you once the work's done. Over there, two boys strain under a crate that leaks suspicious brine onto their tunics. They keep stopping to wipe their brows on their sleeves, leaving dark streaks that only deepen their proud, sweaty grins. You probably wouldn't last 10 minutes hefting these loads, to be honest. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing who's drifting off to sleep or avoiding work from halfway across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander closer to one longship's hull, which rests squat and solid in shallow water. Its overlapping oak planks glisten with tar, sending up that rich, sharp scent that'll stick to your hair all day. A pair of shaggy goats bleat from a pen rigged at the stern. One sticks its muzzle through the slats, snuffling at your sleeve, probably hoping for a treat. Or maybe just testing if you taste salty enough to nibble. Nearby, a carpenter taps iron nails deeper into the ship's prow with practiced strokes, fixing a snarling dragon head that looks ready to bite the horizon. A mainstream historical note here. These decorative prows weren't just for show. Many Vikings believed the fierce shapes could frighten away sea monsters and spirits that lurked along the misty coastlines. Though historians still argue whether these figureheads were actually removed upon approaching friendly ports to avoid offending local spirits. Some sagas mention it, some remain stubbornly silent. Suddenly, a high-pitched squeal splits the morning air. You spin around to see a broad-shouldered sailor wrestling with a pig that apparently didn't volunteer for this voyage. It kicks free, darting between crates, upturning a basket of onions that clatter and roll in every direction. A chorus of curses follows it, but the pig seems gleeful in its little victory lap. You step neatly aside just in time to avoid getting an onion to the ankle. Small mercies. As the sun finally cracks over the horizon, the whole scene bathes in a molten gold wash. Breath clouds rise from tired men who pause to lean on barrels, hands on knees. You notice one man slip something from a leather pouch around his neck, a tiny carved Thor's hammer. He closes his eyes, lips moving in a quiet plea for calm seas. It's a tender moment amid the dockside uproar, reminding you that even fierce warriors needed their small anchors against the vast, unpredictable sea. You take a deep breath, drawing in brine, wood smoke, goat, and sweat, a heady cocktail of Viking ambition. Ahead waits the open water, hungry for ships, for salt-rimmed sails, for the stories that start on these rickety planks. You square your shoulders, ready to follow wherever this rowdy, hopeful chaos leads. You edge your way up a narrow plank onto the ship itself, arms spread for balance as the longship shifts gently beneath you. Below deck, though really it's little more than a shallow hold, you spot stacks of barrels packed tight, wedged with straw so they don't knock about when the waves get feisty. A sailor cracks one open with a deft twist of an iron pry bar, releasing a sour, fishy perfume that punches you right in the sinuses. A mainstream historical fact: dried cod, herring, and even slabs of salted seal meat formed the core protein stash for Viking voyages. The cold North Atlantic meant preserving fish was second nature. These barrels kept for months, though you might not want to be the one cracking them open by week 3. You squat next to another open crate filled with hard, flat discs. You tap one against the ship's plank. It sounds like knocking on a door. Ship's biscuits, flour, water, a sprinkle of salt, baked until roughly the consistency of a roofing tile. Not exactly a luxury pastry. To soften them, Vikings often dunked them straight into ale or broth. Without that, you'd risk cracking a molar. Some travelers even joked it was like chewing pottery. Historians still argue just how much ale was brought versus water. Ale was safer, since brewing killed off many lurking nasties that would happily multiply in stagnant casks of water. But it also took up enormous barrel space. The balance between hydration, calorie value, and precious hold real estate was a constant gamble. You edge back as a young deckhand wedges himself between the crates. He pokes one, then another, testing the seals. "Better this than coming up empty mid-sea," he mutters. Then, with a conspiratorial grin, he raps his knuckles against a particularly large barrel. Or worse, finding out it's turned to vinegar. Nearby, another crewman pries up the lid of a smaller cask and pulls out a handful of smoked meat. Thin threads of steam rise where it meets the cool morning air, and he pops a piece in his mouth with a satisfied grunt. Then he offers you a strip, dark, a little greasy, with a tang that's half campfire, half low tide. You hesitate, then nibble. It's chewy, but undeniably rich, and you imagine how after days at sea, even this simple bite would feel like festival fare. A sudden cheer rings out above as more barrels roll aboard. It's a moment of triumph. Each one means fewer worries out on the open water, and as you wipe your salty fingers on your tunic, you realize this isn't just about fuel for bodies. It's security against the endless, hungry gray waves waiting just beyond the fjord's mouth. You shuffle aft, nose twitching at a particularly pungent scent that wafts up from between two barrels. A thick-bellied sailor leans over, cracking the lid of a squat cask. He lifts it just enough for you to glimpse a pale, lumpy mass bobbing inside a cloudy brine. The smell hits harder now. Sour, a bit cheesy, with a twist of something that might be old socks left in a sauna. "Skyer, or maybe clabbered milk," he chuckles at your expression. "If we're lucky. Could be curdled goat by now." He doesn't seem too bothered, plunging a wooden ladle in and stirring it around like he's searching for sunken treasure. A mainstream historical fact. Vikings carried barrels of fermented dairy, sometimes skyer, sometimes soured milk or whey-based brews. These high-fat, high-calorie foods kept surprisingly well in cold conditions and offered vital nutrients to rowers burning thousands of calories a day. A sharp tang might wrinkle your modern nose, but for them it was a reliable staple, better than nothing when the fish ran low. Historians still argue how carefully these dairy products were managed. Were they layered with special leaves or herbs to fend off mold? Or was it simply a matter of keep it sealed, cross your fingers, and pray to Nonyord for stomachs of iron? The sagas are silent on Tupperware solutions. The big sailor offers you a taste, his grin one part mischievous, one part encouraging. You peer into the ladle, a swirl of white curds floating in faintly yellow liquid. With a tiny shrug of bravery, you tip it back. It's shockingly tart, almost fizzy, with a back note that screams barnyard. You cough once, eyes watering, while the sailor slaps his thigh and bellows a laugh that bounces across the water. Nearby, a trio of boys rolls a barrel on its side, their bare feet slapping against the deck. They chant a nonsense rhyme to keep pace, turning work into a playful contest. A dog trots alongside them, tail wagging high, hoping they'll drop something interesting. One boy finally loses control of the barrel. It lurches, hops once, and smacks into a crate with a hollow thunk. Everyone winces. Someone jokes that if it bursts open, they'll be swimming home in clabbered soup. You lean on the ship's rail, letting the briny air clear your nose, watching the boys scramble to right the wayward barrel. Below, the fjord stretches out, cold, glittering, promising challenges that only hardened stomachs and very forgiving noses could hope to survive. If you weren't committed before, that little sip of fermented mystery ensures you're now truly initiated into the world of Viking provisions. Moving toward the prow, you duck to avoid the low sweep of the mast rigging and nearly trip over a pile of bundled cloaks. A few sailors sort through the heap, holding garments up to sniff them critically. An odd but apparently necessary test. One shakes his head and tosses a fur-lined cape back with a theatrical gag. "Smells like last year's seal hunt," he mutters, earning a round of hoots. A mainstream historical point. Vikings layered tunics, wool cloaks, and fur or sheepskin mantles not just for warmth, but for sheer survival. The North Atlantic showed little mercy. These voyages meant cold spray soaking through to the skin, gales that could rip heat from bones, and nights spent trying to nest in damp straw to steal a wink of sleep. You watch as one man carefully folds a greenish-brown over-tunic, pressing out wrinkles that might have mattered once in a village feast hall, but here seem mostly symbolic. Historians still argue how many changes of clothes typical sailors packed. Some say a single spare tunic and set of breeches was ambitious. Others suggest wealthier men traveling long distances carried trunkloads of finery to impress foreign chiefs. You suspect the average deckhand was lucky if he had 2 decent shirts and a wool cap that didn't itch him mad. A quirky flourish? A bright scrap of embroidery you spot at the collar of one smock. A tiny twist of red and yellow thread forming what might be a dragon. Not exactly Paris couture, but a small personal mark that says, "This is mine, not yours." Identity mattered, even if your only audience was your shipmates and the occasional curious dolphin. You pick up a cloak yourself, surprised by its heft. The wool is coarse, dotted with bits of straw, smelling unmistakably of lanolin and long travel. When you drape it over your shoulders, it warms instantly, holding in your breath like a secret. A bearded sailor gives you a nod of approval. Practical is stylish enough out here. Then someone tugs at your elbow, leading you to a lumpy sack tied with a leather thong. "Spare shoes," he says simply. Inside you find rough boots, some patched so many times they look like puzzles, others stuffed with old sheep wool. Footwear, it turns out, was worth its weight in silver. The last thing a Viking needed was frostbitten toes or deck splinters getting infected on day 5 of a month-long raid. With your new fashion education and the faint but distinct whiff of unwashed wool in your nostrils, you step aside to let the men keep rummaging. Even among warriors famed for fearless charges and iron axes, it seems no one underestimates the humble power of staying dry and slightly less smelly. Not far from the cloaks, you spot a trio of men carefully wrapping small items in scraps of cloth before tucking them deep into their sea chests. Curious, you lean closer and see the flash of polished steel, an axe head, broad and slightly notched from years of use. Another man fits a shorter blade, a sayax, into a sheath at his belt, testing how easily it slips free. A mainstream fact. These weapons weren't just for raiding villages or repelling hostile ships. They were multi-purpose tools, essential for cutting ropes, splitting kindling, or even gutting the occasional unlucky seal. The ship wouldn't leave harbor without a solid complement of axes, knives, and a few broadswords tucked away for the more prestigious crew. But what catches your eye next is even more intriguing. One sailor opens a small carved box and lifts out a delicate pendant, a tiny hammer, unmistakably Thor's Mjolnir. He rubs it between thumb and forefinger, lips moving in a silent invocation. Another man nearby pulls out a pouch strung with beads and little bones. amulets etched with faint runic squiggles. Historians still argue whether these charms were mostly personal faith or powerful social signals. I'm under Thor's protection. Mess with me at your peril. A quirky flourish? You notice a tiny lump of amber tied to one man's wrist with a bit of sinew cord. Amber was prized, believed to carry the sun's luck, and also handy for distracting children back home, or possibly just yourself during a long, dull watch. The men finish their quiet rituals, stashing charms back under tunics. Then one slaps another on the shoulder with a grin. "Let's hope Thor's paying attention, eh?" he chuckles. You can't help but smile. Even the toughest raiders liked a little insurance when facing an ocean that could swallow them in a heartbeat. One sailor catches your eye and nods toward a stack of spare shields lashed tight near the mast. "Not much good packing your courage without something to hide behind," he says with a wink. His shield bears faded knotwork that once might have told a whole saga. Now it's mostly a muddle of blue and scratched wood, but it still feels proud somehow, like an old wolf with scars earned fair. By the time you step back, the deck's busy again. Axes, knives, talismans, all tucked snug against Viking ribs. The longship's spine creaks under shifting weight, as if settling around this motley cargo of sharp steel and half-whispered hopes. You find yourself drawn toward a small circle of men squatting low near the mast, elbows on knees, heads bent together. As you approach, one lets out a triumphant whoop. Apparently he's just won a toss of knucklebones, because he rakes in a modest pile of shiny metal studs with a greedy grin. The others groan, one mock-punching his shoulder in disgust. A mainstream historical truth. Vikings were mad for games. Knucklebones, small, irregular sheep bones used almost like dice, were everywhere. Between these little throws of fortune and simple board games carved into deck planks, they found small distractions to break the long stretches of rowing and waiting. A ship at sea could be mind-numbingly boring when it wasn't terrifying. You squat down with them, and the man who just lost his pile tosses you a wry look. "Your turn, stranger. Try not to shame yourself too badly." He hands over the knucklebones. You give them a shake, feeling their lopsided weight, then roll them onto a smoothed patch of deck. They scatter, clatter, and stop with a disappointing spread. Everyone bursts out laughing, and one sailor slaps your back so hard you nearly kiss the boards. Historians still argue how formal these shipboard pastimes were, whether crews played for serious stakes, like prized beads or silver rings, or simply killed time with gentle bets and rough teasing. Either way, it helped keep tempers from flaring on cramped voyages. Better to lose a round of bones than draw a blade over boredom. A quirky flourish catches your eye as another man fishes around in a small leather sack. He pulls out a carved walrus ivory piece, a tiny man with a huge, silly grin, probably a gaming token. He sets it on the deck and does a waggly dance with it, prompting chuckles from the circle. Even hardened warriors apparently enjoyed a bit of toy theater. As you stand to go, you notice one sailor humming under his breath, eyes closed as if lost in some happy tavern memory. Perhaps last summer's market day, or a girl's bright laugh. That's the unspoken truth here. These games and goofy jokes weren't just to pass time. They were little warm fires of normal life to keep the coldness of the sea and war from creeping too deep into their bones. Later that afternoon, while picking your way between stacked crates and coiled ropes, you nearly trip over a small bundle. It gives off a heady, almost floral scent, totally out of place amid tar and fish. Curious, you tug it open to find tiny cloth bags tied with string. Inside, a dusty yellow powder that smells unmistakably of faraway heat. A sailor crouches down, grinning as he snatches one back. "Not for your nose, friend. That's saffron. Well, a cheap cousin of it," For trading mostly, or bribing, or sweetening a stew when we've been too long at sea. He lifts another pouch and sniffs it, eyes half-lidded like he's somewhere far from this deck. A mainstream historical point. Viking trade routes stretched from the dark pine forests of Scandinavia all the way to Byzantium and beyond. Spices, honeycombs, even dried fruit sometimes found their way aboard ships, tucked carefully among barrels of fish. They were treasures to be rationed. One small spoonful could turn dreary ship fare into a feast, or be saved as a gift for a wary local chief. Historians still argue whether these luxury goods were purely for foreign markets, or occasionally sampled by the crew. Some suggest even the humblest sailor sometimes got a taste, perhaps after a hard fight, as a morale reward. Others believe the best stuff never made it past the hands of shrewd merchants and captains. A quirky little tableau unfolds nearby. Two boys perched on a crate, legs swinging, sharing a dripping hunk of honeycomb. Beeswax clings to their chins. They giggle, whispering conspiratorially about who they'll give the last bite. You suspect one will end up sticky and betrayed. The man who reclaimed his spice bundle winks. Nothing like a pinch of cinnamon to keep men smiling, or keep them from remembering their weeks from land. Then he tucks the pouches deep into his chest wrap, patting them like a hidden treasure chest. As he walks away, the faint, sweet, sour aroma lingers, a ghost of sunlit markets half a world away, bright and fleeting on this salt-drenched deck. As dusk edges across the sky, sailors move about the deck with small lanterns, checking lines and shifting gear. You can't help but wince each time a flame sways near bundles of rope. Everything here feels primed to turn into a floating bonfire. A mainstream fact. Whale oil lamps were common on these voyages, prized for burning brighter and longer than plain tallow. But they smoked terribly, left greasy streaks on wood, and carried an undeniable whiff of rancid ocean. Still, anything was better than groping blindly in total dark as the ship bucked under your feet. You sidle past a sailor carefully trimming a wick. The light flares, then steadies into a steady gold glow. He shields it with his palm, muttering, "No spirits welcome here tonight." Historians still argue if that was literal. Did sailors believe mischievous wights or sea trolls might slip aboard on shadows? Or was it just an old saying that stuck because no one wanted to test it by mocking the dark too loudly? A quirky moment unfolds when another man, clearly younger and a bit jumpy, tries to light his lantern. His flint and steel spark, and finally catch. The little flame shoots up with such sudden cheer that he nearly drops it overboard. His wide eyes meet yours, and you both burst into nervous laughter, like kids caught playing with something forbidden. Above you, the ship's rigging creaks, ropes whispering as they rub together. The lanterns cast bobbing pools of light that turn sailors into looming giants, their shadows stretching across the deck planks in monstrous forms. It's beautiful, eerie, and just a bit thrilling, and it drives home a simple truth. Light was precious. Each tiny lamp was a promise against the vast, devouring dark. A reminder that even far from home, adrift in cold, ink-black water, men could carve out little circles of warmth, enough to laugh by, to drink by, or maybe whisper a quiet hope that tomorrow's sea would be kind. The night deepens around you, and with it comes the practical question every sailor on this longship must face. What exactly will you drink when your throat grows dry? You stumble across a pair of men crouched by large leather water skins, hefting them like skeptical farmers testing a prize gourd. One pulls the stopper and sniffs, then makes a face that suggests he's just been offered week-old eel. A mainstream fact. Fresh water was notoriously tricky to keep on long voyages. Stored in barrels or skins, it quickly went stagnant, growing slimy or taking on a sour tang that could sicken the crew. Many Vikings preferred weak ale, barely alcoholic by modern standards. simply because it stayed safer longer. Even children often drank such small ale back in Scandinavian homes. Historians still argue whether these voyages carried more ale than water, or if local fresh sources were crucial stops along the way. Some sagas boast of mighty men swigging nothing but beer from Denmark to Ireland, while others hint at quiet panic when the last sweet water ran out. A quirky twist comes when the sailor offers you a sip from his skin anyway. Not so bad, he claims. You take a cautious mouthful and promptly cough. It's faintly mossy, tinged with old leather and something like bitter pond. The sailor roars with laughter, slapping your back hard enough to make your eyes water more. See? Not dead yet. That means it's good enough. Nearby, a few younger crew balance mugs, passing around a small cask of ale like a precious heirloom. Their voices soften, stories stretching out under the dark as the ship rolls gently on slow, sleepy waves. Even bad water can taste better with enough jokes and a warm shoulder beside you. You lean back, letting the lull of laughter and the creak of the hull soothe you. Out here, every sip, good or foul, feels like a small toast against the vast, hungry sea. As dawn pinks the horizon again, a sharp cluck shatters your pleasant half-dream. You spin around to see a wiry boy struggling with a flapping wicker cage. Feathers burst out like tiny white fireworks. A hen sticks her head through the bars, eyes wild, beak wide in a shriek of indignant protest. A mainstream historical gem. Vikings often brought live animals on voyages, hens for eggs, maybe a goat for fresh milk, even the occasional pig. These weren't just provisions. They were insurance. Eggs and milk meant small doses of nutrition that didn't come pickled or salted to oblivion. But the real surprise hops up right next to you. A covered perch holding a sleek falcon. The handler lifts the hood and the bird snaps to sharp attention, golden eyes scanning the deck. Historians still argue whether such birds joined sea trips primarily for sport, hunting on foreign shores, or as flashy status symbols for wealthier jarls hoping to impress distant chieftains. A quirky scene plays out as the boy finally gets control of the squawking hen, cradling her close. He strokes her feathers with a practiced calm, murmuring something that might be a lullaby or a string of creative curses. The hen quiets, glaring at you as if to say, "Remember this humiliation when you next want an omelet." Nearby, the falconer lets his bird hop along the rail, claws clicking delicately on the wood. It ruffles, stretches one wing almost lazily, then snaps it back with a smug little shake. Yes, even animals know when they look good. The combination of farm clucks, soft coos, and the fierce, silent watch of a predator makes the ship feel more like a floating barnyard than a war vessel. But it's this messy Noah's Ark ensemble that kept Viking stomachs filled, and hearts just a bit lighter during endless days on cold, gray water. Later in the day, you're pulled toward a corner of the deck where a weathered woman crouches with a small pile of leafy bundles spread on a wool cloth. Her hands work fast, crushing, twisting, tying. When you draw near, the smell rises. Sharp green herbs, something almost like garlic, and a hint of crushed pine needles, a mainstream fact. Even the roughest Viking ships carried simple medical kits. They relied on local herbs and age-old remedies passed down by mothers and healers who knew which leaves soothed burns or coaxed a fever to break. Some ships even took along known wise women, skilled at binding wounds or easing troubled stomachs. Historians still argue how much actual expertise these sea healers possessed. Were they pragmatic field nurses or bearers of old superstitions, more likely to chant over a poultice than prepare it with consistent science? Written records, of course, lean toward drama, praising miracle cures or blaming curses for failures. A quirky grin breaks across the woman's face as she holds out a small lump of dark paste on a bit of cloth. You recoil slightly at the musky, resinous smell, but she presses it into your palm. Her fingers are warm, strong, and leave a faint stain of crushed green. Good for a bruised pride, if nothing else, she teases. Nearby, a young sailor with a nasty scrape on his shoulder sits stoically as she smears the paste across the reddened skin. He flinches, then gives you a forced grin. Better her brew than the sea's bite, he mutters. Indeed, infection out here was a death sentence more feared than any enemy blade. You watch the woman repack her bundles, humming a soft tune. It winds through the rigging, mingling with the flap of sails. Whether pure folklore or early pharmacy, her tiny garden of crushed leaves is another fragile promise that this floating world can heal itself, at least enough to face tomorrow. A sudden shout cuts through the lull of ship life. You spin around to see a cluster of men dragging thick coils of rope across the deck. Nearby lie spare oars, fresh carved and still sticky with resin. A burly sailor grabs one, testing its weight with a practiced heft before laying it carefully alongside others. A mainstream fact. Longships carried far more than just warriors and food. They brought entire mobile workshops. Repairing snapped oars or patching torn sails mid-sea wasn't optional. Each voyage meant a floating carpentry shop with spare pegs, wedges, and blades ready for disaster. You crouch by a pile of tar pots. One sailor uses a flat stick to smear the pungent black pitch along a seam where boards meet. The smell is harsh, clinging to your nose and throat. But it's life insurance. Without tight seams, the sea would be inside faster than any prayer could stop it. Historians still argue about the average crew's true carpentry skills. Were most rowers also handy shipwrights, or did only a handful of specialists carry that vital knowledge? Judging by how many men gather to offer unsolicited advice, arms crossed, smirking, nodding sagely, it seems every Viking was at least a hobbyist critic. A quirky aside unfolds when a boy carrying a hammer nearly trips on a coil of rope. He yelps, does an awkward dance to stay upright, then shoots a mortified glare at the circle of older men now doubled over, laughing. He tries to look stern, but ends up grinning too, cheeks bright as berries. By the time you stand, you can't help tracing your fingers over a fresh line of tar, still glossy. This ship is more than timber and sail. It's a living creature, stitched together by dozens of hands. Each oar, each plank, each careful dab of tar holds a tiny breath of hope that it will all keep holding, at least long enough to reach some safe shore. As evening slides over the ship once more, you drift toward the center deck, where a cluster of rowers rests, hands clasped on knees. Someone starts humming, a low, rhythmic chant that carries just enough melody to stick in your chest. Slowly, one by one, others join in, voices layering like coarse wool until the sound rolls across the water. A mainstream fact. These work songs weren't just for show. They helped keep dozens of oars slicing into the sea at the same instant, turning raw muscle into smooth, unstoppable force. It was as practical as it was stirring. Misaligned pulls could snap a shaft or throw the longship off course in a hard chop. Historians still argue over the exact nature of these rowing chants. Some think they were tightly structured, with set verses for pulling hard and lighter refrains for easing up. Others suspect they were as changeable as the sea. Whoever felt bold enough would start a tune, and the rest would fall in naturally. A quirky note catches your ear. Amid the old, gravelly voices rises a younger sailor's playful counterline, a cheeky riff that makes two men break rhythm with sharp laughs. The chant rolls on anyway, adjusting around the hiccup like a living river. You sit against the gunwale, feeling the vibration through your spine each time the oars dip and tug. Water hisses past, almost approving. Overhead, a gull keeps pace for a while before veering off with an annoyed squawk, as if scolding you for daring to enjoy this small, powerful magic. When the song finally peters out, replaced by quiet breaths and the gentle slap of water, You catch a few half-smiles exchanged among the rowers. Even fierce warriors need moments to blend their hopes into something bigger than fear. Something that sounds, if only for a heartbeat, a lot like peace. Much later, under a moon that paints the sea in frosty pewter, you pull a fur cloak tighter around your shoulders. Nearby, a pair of sailors share a low joke, muffled laughs vanishing quickly into the cold. You can't see much past the faint glow of a few lanterns, just ghostly outlines of rigging and the endless hush of dark waves. A mainstream fact: these night watches were critical. While most men curled up on coils of rope or huddled under spare sails, a skeleton crew kept eyes peeled for sudden shifts, floating ice, surprise reefs, or the glint of an enemy prow. Missing a hint of trouble in this hush could mean disaster. Historians still argue how strictly these shifts were enforced. Some sagas describe sharp discipline under veteran captains who trusted nothing to luck. Others hint at more relaxed watches, where nodding off on a calm night earned only gentle ribbing, until the sea taught a harder lesson. A quirky echo breaks the hush. Somewhere behind you, a man snorts himself awake, coughing and muttering half-dreamed nonsense about chasing silverfish. His companion gives him a rough nudge, both of them chuckling under their breath. Even in the most serious hours, humanity seeps through. The warm absurdity of men trying to look brave while half asleep and probably dreaming of softer beds. You rest your chin on your knees, breath clouding the air. The ship creaks, the boards under you sigh with every small shift. Above, faint stars watch without blinking. And you realize this vigil is older than any story. Humans keeping each other company through long, frightening darkness, hoping dawn will come before too many shadows start whispering your name. Hours later, pale light blooms on the horizon. A sailor shouts from the bow, his voice cracking with excitement. And suddenly, the deck is alive with scrambling feet. You hurry forward, squinting over the heads of taller men until finally you see it. A thin gray line, jagged and solid, breaking the smooth lip of the sea. Land. A mainstream fact. After weeks or months afloat, spotting a coastline was a moment of triumph, an enormous relief. Even hardened Vikings dreaded the monotony and danger of endless water. This promise of firm ground meant fresh springs, new trade, maybe even gold or plunder. It also meant the chance to stretch legs without fear of tipping your entire world sideways. Historians still argue exactly how supplies were managed as voyages neared their end. Some suggest careful rationing meant arriving with casks still half full. Others believe most ships limped in, holds scraped nearly bare, hungry eyes already hunting the next feast. You wander back toward the rear of the ship, glancing into open barrels and crates. A few sprigs of wilted herbs here, a bit of hard cheese spotted with suspicious fuzz there. One sailor plucks out the last half-stale biscuit, sniffs it, then pops it in his mouth with a shrug. Waste not, want not. A quirky finale plays out as the boy with the hen carefully opens her cage. She hops onto the deck, ruffling her feathers and casting him a withering look. If birds held grudges, you suspect he'd be in serious trouble. She pecks around, unconcerned, while the boy watches like a nervous father. As the coast grows sharper, your heart lifts despite the filth under your nails and the brine crusting your skin. This long voyage, filled with cracked knuckle bones, sour milk, chanting voices, and the endless breath of salt air, draws to a close. And you feel it deep in your ribs, the pride of having stood shoulder to shoulder with men who dared wrest life from the cold, capricious sea. Now, with the ship easing toward a rocky inlet, the rush of voices quiets. Oars lift, dripping from the water, trailing silver arcs that vanish back into gentle ripples. The sea lies calm, almost tender now, as if offering a final soft hand after weeks of testing every muscle and nerve you possess. You settle down near the prow, letting the fur slip loose from your shoulders. Cool morning air slides across your skin, scented faintly with wet wood, old salt, and the lingering musk of packed cargo. It's oddly pleasant, fresh, stripped of all the frantic noise that usually fills your head. Somewhere behind you, a crewman hums under his breath. Not a work chant this time, but a lullaby, low and warm, curling through the rigging like lazy smoke. The sound draws out the tension that's been coiled tight in your shoulders since you first stepped on this longship. Each note seems to say, "You're here now, you made it." You close your eyes, listening to the gentle slap of small waves against the hull. The longship rocks in an easy cradle, the boards under you warm from countless sunrises. Somewhere far off, gulls laugh, sharp little cries softened by distance. When you open your eyes again, the coastline waits, mist coiling around dark rocks, promising new stories and new beds of mossy earth to rest on. You breathe deep, let the cool air fill your lungs, and feel every worn edge inside you soften. Here at this quiet edge between sea and shore, you let your last thoughts drift like fragile boats across still water. They float without hurry, carried by the hush of old waves and the promise of calm nights to come.